Your father, and I won't be able to make the wedding." For a second, I couldn't speak. I stood in the middle of my apartment, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the final seating chart spread across my kitchen table. "What happened?" I asked. "Is Dad okay?" Mom actually laughed. "No, Miriam, nothing happened. Jason surprised us with a trip to Dubai." My stomach dropped. "My wedding is in 11 days. I know when your wedding is. And Dad is supposed to walk me down the aisle." Mom sighed like I was inconveniencing her. "Jason spent a lot of money on this trip. We leave 4 days before the wedding. You can't expect everyone's lives to stop because you're getting married." That sentence did something to me. For 30 years, I had been the daughter who adjusted. Jason got priority, I got explanations, and somehow I was always expected to smile afterward. "Put Dad on." There was shuffling. Then my father's voice came through. "Miriam, we'll celebrate with you another time." Another time. As though my wedding could be recreated over dinner. So I finally asked the question I had swallowed my entire life. If Jason's trip and my wedding happen at the same time, why am I automatically the one who loses? Silence. And that silence gave me an answer neither of them was willing to say aloud. Mom took the phone back. "You're creating unnecessary drama 11 days before your own wedding." Then she ended the call. I stared at the screen for several seconds before Daniel walked in and immediately saw my face. "What happened?" "My parents aren't coming." He stopped. I explained Dubai, Jason, the timing, my father abandoning the promise he'd made nearly a year earlier. Daniel reached for my hand. "I can walk down with you. We can change the entrance." I shook my head. I need to decide what I actually want, not what fixes their decision. Then I picked up the seating chart. 2 names sat in the front row. Patricia Carter, David Carter. I crossed them both out. That evening, Daniel's father, Thomas Reed, came over after hearing what happened. Thomas was a widowed retired teacher, the kind of man who never demanded attention but somehow noticed when someone needed him. He had treated me like family throughout our engagement. He didn't insult my parents. He didn't tell me what I should do. He simply sat across from me and said, "Whatever you decide, Miriam, you won't walk into that room alone." I looked at him, and suddenly, I knew exactly whose arm I wanted beside me. What none of us knew was that the documentary crew already scheduled to film Thomas would capture that walk too. And eventually, millions of people would see exactly who showed up when my own parents didn't. 2 days later, Dad asked to meet me alone. For one dangerous second, I let myself hope. Maybe he had reconsidered. Maybe he was going to tell Mom that Dubai could wait and that walking his daughter down the aisle couldn't. Instead, he sat across from me at a quiet cafe and slid a white envelope across the table. "What's this?" "Something for the honeymoon." I opened it enough to see the money inside, then pushed it straight back. "I don't want this." "Miriam, is walking your only daughter down the aisle really worth less to you than a few extra days in Dubai?" His expression tightened. "Everything is already booked." But Jason knew my wedding date when he booked it. Dad looked away. He found a good package. That answer caught me. A good package. "Miriam, changing international travel arrangements now would be complicated." Complicated. Not impossible. I leaned forward. "So which is it? You can't change the trip or you don't want to." He didn't answer. Instead, he lowered his voice. "There's something else, your mother, and I need from you." Of course there was. If people ask why we're missing the wedding, just tell them we had an unavoidable travel commitment. I stared at him. "You want me to lie? We don't need the whole family judging your mother. You're skipping my wedding, and I'm supposed to protect you from people knowing why. We're asking you not to turn this into something bigger than it needs to be." That was when I finally understood the arrangement I'd spent years calling family peace. They made the decisions. I absorbed the consequences. Then I protected their reputation. Not anymore. If somebody asks me where you are, I said, standing, I'll tell them the truth. Dad's jaw tightened. You may regret making one family decision into something bigger. I left his envelope untouched on the table. That evening, I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hand. Then I called Thomas. He answered on the third ring. Miriam, everything okay? I closed my eyes. There's something I want to ask you. Anything. I swallowed. Would you walk me down the aisle? For the first time since I had known him, Thomas Reed had absolutely nothing to say. The two empty seats in the front row were impossible to miss. I stood behind the closed venue doors in my wedding dress, listening as the last guests settled inside. 11 months of planning had led to this moment, and my parents were thousands of miles away in Dubai. The documentary crew was already filming. They had originally come because Thomas's relationship with Daniel was part of their short film. Nobody had planned for my family situation to become part of it. Then Thomas stepped beside me. He looked at the doors, then at me. You're sure? I nodded and slipped my arm through his. I'm sure. The doors opened. Conversation stopped. Thomas and I walked forward together. I saw relatives glance toward my parents' empty seats, then back at the man walking beside me. The people who knew what had happened understood immediately. Thomas didn't try to make the moment his. He simply kept pace with me. At the altar, Daniel was waiting. Thomas placed my hand into his son. Take care of each other, he said quietly. Daniel pulled his father into a brief embrace before taking my hand. The cameras caught everything. Hours later, during the reception, my cousin approached me with her phone. Miriam, have you seen this? On the screen was a photograph of my parents smiling beside Jason in Dubai. It had been posted while I was getting married. My cousin lowered her voice. Your mom made it sound like something unavoidable happened. People thought there was an emergency. Now everyone could see otherwise. Don't contact them, I said. Not tonight. I refused to let Dubai take over my reception too. Weeks later, Daniel and I were home when the documentary editor called. The wedding footage changed the film, she said. Thomas walking you down the aisle became its emotional center. I looked at Daniel. Neither of us had expected that. Then the editor's voice became more serious. Before we release this, there's something in that footage you need to see. The editor played the rough cut without saying another word. Daniel sat beside me. Thomas was across from us, his hands folded as the wedding footage filled the screen. There were no names flashed across the screen accusing my parents of anything. No dramatic narration. Just what had happened. The footage showed me waiting behind the venue doors. Thomas stepped beside me. You ready? As ready as I'm going to be. Then came a short interview clip recorded before the ceremony. My parents decided to take another trip, I said on screen. They won't be here today. Then the film cut back to Thomas and me. The doors were seconds from opening. And I heard something I hadn't heard clearly on my wedding day. Thomas leaned slightly toward me and whispered, You deserved somebody who kept their promise today. I looked across the room at him. You said that. Thomas nodded. I didn't know the microphone caught it. Neither had the filmmakers. The editor paused the footage. We can remove it. I looked at Daniel, then back at the screen. No. Because Thomas hadn't performed that moment for a camera. He had simply shown up. Leave it. The documentary was released. Within days, the numbers became difficult to comprehend. Hundreds of thousands of views became millions. Then the counter crossed ***, 11 million***. Most viewers weren't focused on attacking my parents. They were talking about Thomas, The father-in-law who quietly stepped forward when the bride's own father chose not to be there. But people who knew my family recognized us. My parents were still abroad when relatives started contacting them. Then Jason called me. "Miriam, I need to ask you something." "What?" "Mom and Dad are telling everyone they couldn't change the Dubai arrangements." "That's what Dad told me too." Silence. Then Jason said, "That doesn't make sense." I sat upright. "What do you mean?" Another pause. "I offered to change their flights." My hand tightened around the phone. Jason continued, "I need to send you something." Seconds later, screenshots from the family travel chat appeared. I opened the first, then the second. By the third, every explanation my parents had given me was collapsing. Before I could finish reading, my phone lit up. "Mom." It started ringing. I didn't answer Mom. Not yet. I needed to finish reading what Jason had sent me. The screenshots went back several weeks before the wedding. Jason had noticed the conflict almost immediately. "Miriam's wedding is that weekend. I can move your departure until after it." Mom had replied that changing the flights would cost more. Jason offered another solution. They could travel as planned, return early for my wedding, then rejoin him afterward. Again, Mom refused. Then I reached the message that ended every excuse they had given me. Mom had written that they had already attended enough of my wedding things, and that I would eventually get over a asterisk. Dad's response wasn't a protest. He agreed. I stared at those words. There had been no impossible booking. No unavoidable travel commitment. My brother, the person I had assumed they were choosing over me, had actually offered them ways to attend my wedding. They simply didn't want the inconvenience or extra expense. My phone rang again. Then again. Over the next 3 days, the fallout became impossible to ignore. Between repeated calls from my parents, relatives checking on me, and family acquaintances reaching out after recognizing us in the documentary, my phone eventually showed **86 missed calls and messages. When I finally answered Mom, she didn't say hello. "Do you understand what you've done to us?" I almost laughed. "What I've done? 11 million people have seen that video. We're being humiliated." I looked at Daniel sitting beside me. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Which part of the documentary was false? Silence. Was it false that you went to Dubai? Nothing. Was it false that Dad didn't walk me down the aisle? Miriam, that isn't the point. It's exactly the point. Dad came onto the call. We had already committed to the trip. You could post something explaining that. I looked down at Jason's screenshots. I've seen the messages, Dad. Another silence. This one was different. I know Jason offered to move your flights. I know he offered to bring you back early. And I know Mom said I'd eventually get over it. Neither of them answered. There was nowhere left for the story they had created to hide. Jason refused to become their excuse too. When relatives asked him what happened, he told them plainly that he had offered to rearrange the itinerary, and our parents had chosen not to. I could have posted every screenshot. I didn't. The documentary had already shown enough. But I also refused to release some carefully worded statement, pretending my parents had been victims of bad timing. And the money Dad had tried to give me before the wedding. I returned it. I wanted nothing they could later point to and say, "See, we supported her." There was no lawsuit, no dramatic financial collapse, no manufactured revenge. What they lost was something much harder to restore: trust. For years, Mom and Dad had known I would eventually smooth things over. I would make the extra call, accept the weak apology, explain their behavior to relatives. That version of our relationship ended with my wedding. I told them, "You'll still receive invitations when appropriate, but I'm not begging you to come anymore. I'm not rearranging everything to make choosing me easier. If you want a relationship with me, showing up is your responsibility. Mom started to argue. I ended the call. Months passed. The documentary remained the crew's most widely viewed project, but Daniel and I refused to build our marriage around what had gone viral. Our life became ordinary again, in the best possible way. My contact with my parents became limited. When they were respectful, I responded. When they tried to guilt me into repairing the damage for them, I stepped away. And Thomas never once acted as though walking me down the aisle had earned him a new title. He never tried to replace my father. He didn't need to. There's a photograph from the wedding framed in our home now. I'm standing just before the aisle in my wedding dress. Thomas is beside me. My arm is linked through his. And whenever I look at it, I don't see the two people who were missing. I see the person who showed up. My parents believed I would spend the rest of my life waiting to finally be chosen over Jason. Instead, their absence taught me something their presence never had. Family wasn't proved by the seat someone was supposed to occupy. It was proved by who stood beside you when that seat was empty. I spent years waiting for my parents to choose me, but on the day they didn't show up, I finally stopped needing them to.